Welcome back to part three with Randy Hatfield from the Human Development Council. So, Randy, we kind of had a broad discussion of
Yeah.
general issues at the UB rate hearings, poverty, what the government's role and be Power's role. Second part of our discussion was very specific on your time at the EUB. And I guess this third part, I want to focus more on the advocacy portion of it. And what role should all of these proponents play? And any solutions or recommendations or just ideas that we should bounce off each other to help solve this kind of energy poverty problem that we're facing. So to just give a general recap, NB Power is proposing an over 20% increase over the next 2 years. We discussed that in detail, but let's talk about once the decision is made by the EUB. After that, what do you see playing out? And what role should we play? What role should government play? And NB Power, if you can just break down any thoughts you have there.
Yeah, our jurisdictional scan when we started the energy poverty down that road led us to see some very effective advocacy efforts by civil society in other provinces. And I look just across the isthmus at Nova Scotia and I see how effective and how powerful they have been and organized in what they've done. They have an affordable energy coalition that's been around for a couple of decades now. And they've been able to retain experts, as Dr. Colton I spoke of, who dealt with low-income energy rebates, and he's appeared twice before the regulator in Nova Scotia and just authored a report last April on energy poverty. And I lament the fact that in New Brunswick it's just very difficult to organize. Very difficult to put it together for reasons of geography and reasons of population, reasons of language. It's a really difficult province to navigate from the community nonprofit sector, stemming, I think, from episode 1 when we talked about capacity of small cities. You know, when you think of New Brunswick with 850,000 people, it has 3 census metropolitan areas acknowledged by Stats Canada as having 50,000 within a catchment area of 100,000. There are only 4 in Alberta, and they've got 10 times their population. You know, it's really hard. I'm not aware of any ED, for instance, in the province of New Brunswick that's sitting back thinking, well, there's nothing on this side of my desk. Maybe I'll try energy. Everybody's flat out. Everybody's just trying to keep the door open to retain staff to deal with the challenges that are in the sector, given the fact that, you know, we lack a sector council. We're the only province without a voice for the community nonprofits. So there's no voice for that. And so then you sort of think, well, if you said we'll start an affordable energy coalition, how would you do that? You would look to the obvious candidates, your leadership in the Conservation Council in New Brunswick, and I can think of a handful of other organizations with a provincial reach. Coalition for Pay Equity, Common Front for Social Justice, Inclusion New Brunswick, Ability New Brunswick. Up north is the Volunteer Centre in Carquette. So there are pieces that you would want to put together, but people can't do it off the side of their desk. There has to be some capacity. There has to be some leadership. There has to be a paid asset, a person who's putting their full time and energy into pulling together all these partners, educating all these partners, participating in public relations efforts, and making the case. It's all a question of voice, and it's pretty quiet in New Brunswick right now.
What would it take to get a sector council within New Brunswick?
Well, we've had discussions for years. Back in the aughts, there was a group called the Community Nonprofit Organization Secretariat, created by the province, that did some advocacy work, and that could be me.
That's all right.
That's why we are neophytes in this. We're just starting off, you know. And,
no worries.
Yeah, apologize for that.
Yeah.
But the Community Nonprofit Organization Secretariat was soon morphed and absorbed by ESIC, the Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation. It hasn't yet seen itself with a mandate to organize community nonprofits and act as an advocate for that. The issues that were around 20 years ago or 40 years ago are still around now when it comes to community-based nonprofit organizations. The inadequate salaries that are paid, the precarity of the positions that are there, the lack of professional development opportunities, the absence of a pension plan, for instance. You know, I think the sector in many cases trains thoroughbreds that then are absorbed and attracted by government. And I understand the lure of superannuation and job security. I get that, but it just means that it's really hard as a sector to mature institutional knowledge, a depth of knowledge, and an ability to sort of to advocate effectively. And the other thing in New Brunswick is to understand, the revolution that happened in the 60s, which was a long time ago, but the Equal Opportunity Program, where the first elected Acadian premier came to power and called the Royal Commission on Taxation, the Byrne Commission in 1963, that looked at the county system of government. There were 15 counties in New Brunswick that actually had political roles. They administered health and education and justice and welfare. But there were shameful disparities in the province. 2 of the counties were on the verge of bankruptcy, one-room schoolhouses up north, an unorganized teaching profession. So Louis Robichaud said, well, we're just going to get rid of counties. They're gone. And Fredericton will do everything. Health and education and justice and welfare. So it's a very centralized province when it comes to funding and jurisdiction. Municipalities, I think, were left off the hook, and that's why you see municipalities struggling with their role, if any, on social files. And that's been a perennial sort of discussion in New Brunswick. It's not so much a controversial piece in Ontario or in other provinces, but in New Brunswick, this mantra has emerged: the services to property are the responsibility of cities, services to people belong to the province. And it's really difficult. And then when you start funding on a per capita allocation, if you're not careful, you're treating unequal populations equally and exacerbating the very difficulty that you're trying to overcome in the first place. So we've got all that institutional governmental piece over there, and then we've got the concentration within our parliamentary system throughout the country, really, of within leaders' offices, whether it's a PMO in Ottawa or a Premier's office in Fredericton. And that makes it difficult to know which line department you're supposed to advocate with. And the nature of bureaucracy itself is that change will happen when you can engage senior level bureaucrats. If you don't get them at the table, then there are people that are there generally to protect their own interests, and you don't really see an ability or a willingness to bring about some change. So where do you start? I think. And this is the problem. It calls for resources. It calls for some base amount or some base allocation that can allow you to retain an individual or individuals that can work these files. Because, as I said, I just don't see the capacity within existing organizations. Maybe yours is an exception. Maybe you're looking for things to do, but I doubt it.
We're not looking for more to do.
No.
Our mandate's very broad.
Yeah.
All of our staff are completely at capacity, over capacity.
Yeah.
And I agree with a lot of the sentiments that you provided there, right? Like, in this nonprofit sector, there's not enough collaboration between the nonprofits.
Yeah.
There's not enough security within the nonprofit sector, within New Brunswick.
Yeah.
There's limitations everywhere. Yeah. And just trying to get anything done, any advocacy done, it's tremendously difficult. Yeah. And the amount of resources it takes to fight on behalf of either the people or the environment or anything else, it's time consuming. And without that consistency, it's hard to make real progress. Yeah. And the progress that I'm trying to make, that you're trying to make, we're trying to get into the systems level, trying to change the system itself to be more equitable, to be more just. And that takes, that goes towards that senior leadership.
Sure.
Right? But it takes time to build up to eventually get to that level. Yeah. And a lot of the other grassroots organizations all around New Brunswick, there's no way they're going to be able to get to that level anytime soon. Yeah. So all of that burden is always placed on a bit more established organizations like ours, but there's only so many files we can work on because of the limitation of staff and resources. Yeah. So, I mean, I would love to see a sector council built in New Brunswick. It has to come in, and hopefully the government will look into that. And I think that will help the nonprofit, and I think it'll help New Brunswick in general, because a lot of the work that we do is for New Brunswickers. It's for the people, right? Yeah. So I would love to see that kind of change. Yeah. And in terms of, an election's coming up, the rate hearings, we don't know what the new rate is going to be, but, that's on everybody's mind. What should maybe be government's focus in terms of low-income families, in terms of these rate increases? What kind of solutions should government be focused on, and what should us in the nonprofit sector, what should we focus on? If you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think affordability is the word of the decade. And I think it's really gaining traction, and it's pervasive and throughout. So ultimately, it's income. Ultimately, it's money. We didn't take advantage of the crisis of COVID and understand the importance of something like CERB, despite all the wrinkles, but putting money in people's hands that didn't have it before meant that they went about with a bounce to their step. Attendance at food banks declined. People had agency. They were spending money. It was all spent locally. And we've seen just that V factor, that bounce. So we're back and we're exceeding pre-pandemic levels of some socioeconomic status measures that I think are that need some dire attention. So going back to something like a low-income rebate for energy users, low-income energy users, is that best accommodated by targeting a support program through MB Power? Or is it better done through an income support measure introduced by the province? There's argument that a taxpayer-funded benefit covers a broader class of contributors and a wider tax base than going only to energy users, for instance, and increasing their bills to accommodate a low-income rebate. So there are lots of challenges, and I think in New Brunswick we defer and we require the participation of the province. New Brunswick has 10 MPs, the Atlantic is 38, or 39 rather, and there are 58 in GTA. So I mean, in terms of political influence and clout, it's not going to happen here.
We're smaller.
So what can we do with the province? And everybody is looking to the province for leadership, for investments, for programs, for targeted relief. So I'm not sure. And again, our scale we don't have national foundations. We don't, we have foundations. We have community foundations, And that goes back again to these three little cities that we have. The United Way, I know, just consolidated, but there continues to be the Moncton in the south east, and then the rest of the province. But 3 community councils on homelessness, 3 of everything. And they're all scaled small, so they're engaged in these efforts of containment, trying to address the problem that they're seeking to overcome, and it just doesn't leave a lot of gas for anything else. It doesn't give us that opportunity or that capacity to make some noise, to do the lobbying that requires effort and time.
So because of this kind of separation, we're seeing that everything is just a Band-Aid solution.
Sure.
Right? So you're putting a Band-Aid on St. John, Band-Aid on Moncton, Band-Aid on Fredericton. Yeah. Everything is reactive, and there is simply no space for proactive work.
Right.
I guess my question would be, like, how would we get to that proactive stage? But I guess you already answered it with the sector council, right? Someone kind of combining all these efforts and avoid duplication of efforts and trying to fight for the same goal.
Right.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I hear the word duplication a lot. It's often used by economic interests as a slam sometimes. There's so much duplication in your sector, Randy. I say, we better choose our words very carefully. I don't think needy populations are being overserved. Okay, now if you want to talk about economies of scale, collaboration, cooperation, I'll nod to that. But I'm hesitant to embrace duplication as something that's a problem within our communities. But that's just another issue that we struggle with in St. John a lot. A lot of people doing homelessness work, a lot of duplication. Well, we're not
if the problem's still
there, food banks are for food banks. They're not duplicating each other. They're each fulfilling a need for a cohort of residents that they're trying to serve. But a sector council is very difficult to come about too. Nova Scotia is a very effective one. They just rebranded as the Impact Organizations. I know BC is a solid one. On the Ontario Nonprofit Network, I just participated in a webinar with Public Legal Education and ONN, talking about the challenges in the sector and the absence of something like a pension plan for the nonprofit sector. It's hard to retain people in the sector, and we can argue that the impact that you would have in your position is real and it's meaningful and you're touching people's lives, and that should provide, a nice psychological hit, and you should feel good about the work you do. But at the same time, you've got to pay your rent.
Yeah.
Or as we say, you got to pay your rent and you got to pay your light bill. And so those two pieces, those two basic needs alone, mean that we have to look at the levels of compensation and the absence of job precarity that persists throughout the province.
And bringing it back to the energy poverty discussion, we talked about hopefully the government trying to implement an energy poverty strategy to deal with some of those. And with elections coming up, there's discussion of different solutions for this energy rate hike.
Right.
Do you want to kind of outline what some of those solutions are and your thoughts on them?
Well, the writ was dropped yesterday.
Yeah.
We're in the midst of an election now. It'll end on October 30 or 21st. And each party has a measure that they want to, use on the stump that suggests that they are sensitive to affordability. That's featuring into it. But affordability seems to be to reducing tax burden or tax measures. And again, we'll split sort of on philosophy or ideology as to whether it should be a broad-based drop in an HST, or whether it should be a targeted use of HST in provincial portions on utility bills, or whether it should be a low-income benefit. I think there are benefits and burdens to each one. That's a debate that's worth having, and I hope in the course of this election campaign that people will be able to parse some of the entreaties that the political parties are making for votes, and to judge them. How broadly based are they? If they are targeted, are they reaching the right target? But affordability and poverty, we have a lot of working poor in this province. We have a lot of people that we do an annual living wage calculation using the National Living Wage Framework, and we're able to conduct them fairly rigorously for Moncton, Fredericton, and St. John. But our sparse population and data sets means it's very difficult to create a rural one. So for the first time this year, we've created a provincial one, and we're releasing that next week, the provincial living wage.
Look forward to that.
And that'll be $24 and change, which is a huge difference to the minimum wage. This is $15.30. So, and we've always debated minimum wage issues and challenges. It was never designed as an income that was meant to provide for basic needs or a quality of life. It was meant to be the lowest amount that you could probably get away with without having too many more people fall into poverty. But there's an income challenge in this province. The value proposition for a long time in New Brunswick was affordable housing and cheap labor and cheap power, and I'm not sure that those three elements still are as alive today as they were in the past as to reasons for people to come and invest and to stay in New Brunswick. So we're certainly seeing strains on family budgets and on individual budgets that I don't think were as profound as they are now, as they were before. And so that's a challenge. The fixed income folks in New Brunswick are really, really challenged, given the way that inflation for rent and for utilities and for food is far beyond the overall CPI of 2.5% or even 3%.
Would rate design, changing how the rates are structured, would that, based off the current system, are there any alternatives that could kind of help out the low-income families?
I'm not a rate design expert, but it seems to me that if you had something like an inclining block rate, if you started off with your first 400 or 800 kilowatt hours, we're at a small rate that's meant to accommodate that's the amount of electricity that would keep you alive, and keep you warm enough in the winter that you could cook and stay warm. And in some jurisdictions, that's called the lifeline amount. So an inclining block would mean that the more, it's like a progressive income tax. The more you use, the more you earn, the more you'll pay. Now there are arguments against that one as well. I mean, these are not easy arguments to have. They cut many different ways. But if we can all agree on the fact that we have an affordability problem right now, and we're faced with a situation that unless we address it, we're going to see increased mispayments, greater arrears, the more need for repayment plans, and more disconnections.
One idea that was proposed is removing the tax
Yep.
off these bills.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that provides relief. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it has to be weighed, I guess, by a political party as to the other interests, whether it's primary care or education or social services. But I think anything that provides economic relief is to be thought of favorably.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Yeah.
But there are always winners and losers for anything, and so, and that I think comes back to what we talked about before: is voice and participation. I mean, as part of this electoral campaign, we're starting a campaign on civic engagement and pointing out to the folks in St. John, anyway, that of 49 provincial ridings, the bottom 3 in terms of voter turnout are found in St. John. You know, St. John Harbour, where our office is located, contains 3 of the city's 5 priority neighborhoods, and it has always finished last of the 49.
Really?
Less than 50% the last time. So it's, and that's hard, and that goes to voter turnout, which goes to political efficacy. Does people see any reason to go to vote, or do they think the system's so rigged against them that that's not going to make a difference? And yeah, there's just a host of challenges, but I don't think we can deny, or anybody could deny, that more and more people are struggling economically to meet their basic needs. Maslow's hierarchy, that triangle, unless you've got food and safety and accommodation dealt with, you're not going to move towards self-actualization or transcendence. You're not going to move to the top unless you've got the foundation, and for too many people the foundation isn't being met.
Gotcha. Well, you've talked quite a bit on some of the recommendations for government and NB Power. Any recommendations for people that are on the poverty line? Any resources that they might be able to look into that might help their situation out? There's a problem.
Yeah. That's a real tough one. I think if we're talking basic needs, then we have the housing crisis right now of affordability and availability, the age of the housing stock, the influence of REITs, real estate investment trusts, the financialization of the housing sector has put it out of reach of many people. Newcomers, those that are have made bundles off of their bungalow in Surrey and Edmonton and Ontario that wish to come here, for good reasons. But it's bid up the price of housing to the point that I think many locals and many residents of New Brunswick are finding a huge difference between the ability to have a starter home now and to what it was even 10 or 15 years ago.
Right.
So I think just a host of factors are out there making the need of some sensible public policy. I'm not an expert, and we've talked about some particular measures, but it all fits this kaleidoscope that has to mesh somehow and make a picture that's coherent and that's sustainable. And we'll have a federal election within the year, by next October, at the latest. So that'll be a chance as well to try to make some points, to have influence there. In New Brunswick as well, we now have regional services commissions. They've been created throughout the province. There are a dozen of them, and in the 3 principal areas, they've been given the jurisdiction or the authority to look at housing and homelessness and mental health and addictions. And I'm still puzzled as to how you can create a quasi level of government without taxation authority or the ability of it to raise money, other than from contributions from constituent municipalities. So that's a piece of governance that hasn't fully rolled out in New Brunswick yet. That may have some opportunities for influence. I know each one of the 12 has a community developer funded by the Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation. So the jury's still out as to its role and its impact, but that's something that's new for New Brunswick.